What's up, Dragon Brood? So, today we're going to be trying, well, we all knew it was coming, Giants. Now, we'll get into it in the deck building. There's just so much that made this difficult. I actually wanted to make this one of the first decks I put out for the season, and it was not easy, I will tell you that. And maybe I made it more difficult than it needed to be. We can talk about that too. But before we get into it, remember to like this video, and then subscribe to the channel to help me out, and get yourself notifications every time we have decks coming up, because we're putting out multiples every day leading up to the release of Kaldheim. But for now, let's go get into that discussion on what this Giants deck might look like. Okay, let me say overall, one of the biggest problems I was running into is that everything is just crazy expensive for the Giants. And the lower cost cards that specifically reference Giants didn't feel like they did enough. They weren't like removing things. They were just like, they were setting you up to be able to play your Giants. You know, even a turn or two later, your Giants would be cheaper. And that's cool. But it's also like by the time you almost have the mana to start casting Giants anyway. So I'm not really sure where they fit. And again, this could just be on me not really playing with them enough yet to really understand how a lot of these cards interact. So after putting a few different lists together, I came back to just doing something a little bit different, and we're just going Temur so we can try to take advantage of some green mana stuff and try to help solve some of our problems. Not a lot, but just a little bit. So we're going to start at the top here. Mostly going to be figuring out what to do with our early turns. Our early turns are going to be playing either Fire Prophecy, try to kill a threat, get rid of an expensive card, try to find something we could play the next turn, search for a land, whatever it is we need to do with it. Or if we're not doing Fire Prophecy things, we're casting Lotus Cobras. Lotus Cobra, I get it. It's going to be one of the few things your opponent can target with like their Blood Chief's Thirst or whatever, so we don't leave that as a dead card, which is a thing that Giants will get to do. That said, it's just one of those things I think is worth the risk. Now, if you don't want to do that, the other option is you could play Wolf Willow Haven, which is totally reasonable. It'll still get you from that 2 mana point to 4 mana on the following turn. Totally understandable if you want to go that route. Wouldn't complain about that at all. Completely a reasonable replacement. Even more so if you don't own Lotus Cobra or don't want to spend the resources or the cash on it. Wolf Willow Haven's totally reasonable replacement. We do have 2 Aegir, the Freezing Flame. And this is whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess damage. If a giant, wizard, or a spell you control dealt damage, you get to draw a card. So basically, if you run into a creature with your giant and they block with like a 2/2, then you're going to get to draw a card, right? If you use a Fire Prophecy on a thing that's a 1/1 or 2/2, you're going to get to draw a card. Basically, any excess damage, as long as it came from one of those sources, you're going to get something for it. Seems good. It's a 3/3 for 3. It's one of the small, cheap things we can play that are giants. So I'm all about it. Think it's a good card here. Possibly could find room for a 4th, honestly. Then we're playing Bone Crusher Giants. And in this deck, not only the versatility of Stomp, but really because it gives us another thing to do on the early turns. So that gives us 4 Stomp, 4 Cobra, 3 Fire Prophecy that we can at least do with our mana on turn 2 to set up something reasonable the following turn. Because a lot of times it's going to be like, hey, we're just removing a small threat so we can get down to 3/3 or 4/3 or something that next turn to really gum up the board and start doing what we need to do on the later turns. So we'll see how it works out, but obviously we weren't going to play this and leave Bone Crusher Giant out because it's easily the most efficient giant. Then we're playing 3 copies of Mecha Godzilla, or the Gym Giant, right? However you want to call it. I think the artwork's sweet though on this card. But it is a 3/3 for 3. The other good thing is it's 3 colorless mana, so we don't have to worry about drawing the wrong lands and setting something up. It may get bigger, it may gain flying, it gets a chance to get all the abilities, which is also good. So it's just a quality all-around card for this list, which is funny because I believe when it first came out, and everybody kept trying to shove this into so many lists when it didn't belong. Now we have a thing for a Giants, and a lot of the lists I've seen don't actually want to include this one. So I don't know what's going on. But it was one of the ones I definitely was going to put in here. Again, could maybe go to a 4th if we wanted to cut some expensive mana elsewhere. Now, obviously, we're getting into the 4 mana Giants are actually fairly solid and decent for what they do. But this one here, we have Calamity Bearer. If a giant source you control would deal damage to a permanent or a player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. Obviously, any of our giants are going to be 3 or 4 power, awesome. You know, if our Mecha Godzilla ends up becoming 4/4, or maybe it has flying or whatever, like that's a huge bonus to have that like on turn 3 and then this on turn 4. And again, you get in that conversation about excess damage where you may draw another card if you have an Aegir out the previous turn. There's a lot of stuff going on here that's really good. And late game, if they just run out of blockers, like one hit could be 8 or 10 damage sometimes, depending on what you're hitting your opponent with. So I'm really looking forward to see how well this card works out. And remember that it says when it deals damage to a permanent or a player. So it's possible that you could use a 3 power giant to block a 5/5 or a 6/6 potentially. Like that's totally a thing you're going to be able to do. So it's almost like being able to use your creatures as removal, even if they're undersized for whatever turn. Then we're playing 2 Kolvari. And this thing, like, okay, so let me say you're almost never going to get the front side to be a bonus. Like Kolvari says, as long as you control 3 or more legendary creatures, it becomes +4/+2. Otherwise, it's a 2/4. So you can turn it into a 6/6. We're almost never going to get it as a 6/6 because we don't have any legends to meet that requirement. So you just assume it's going to be a 2/4. The other ability, though, is look at the top 6 cards of your library. You can reveal a legendary creature from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest in the bottom of your order. So you could play it to go search for another one if you wanted a card to discard, search for an Aegir, but that's like all we can do. And you're probably wondering why it's in the list. The reason it's in the list is because of the backside. The backside, let me see if I can click on it here and show this to you. It doesn't show up right on my screen. That's so disappointing. Well, the backside, believe it or not, is actually a mana artifact. It's 2 mana. You put it in play and you can tap for green. That's the biggest reason we're playing it, because it's another thing you can do for 2 mana early. It can help you find more mana to play multiple things, because that's going to be the hardest thing about this deck, is you're going to get stuck in a lot of situations where you're going to be on one spell a turn till much later in the game, and you want to at least give yourself the opportunity to play more stuff. So that's the main reason it's here. It can be a creature or a blocker or whatever later if you need it to be, but you're mostly playing it for that little mana advantage. We'll see if it works out that way, though. Then we have Tectonic Giant. And this is a card I've actually played in other lists that were non-giants, and I actually really like the card. Mostly because it feels like you're almost always going to get something out of it once it's on the battlefield. Like, it's a 3/4. When it attacks, you're going to deal 3. Now, that being said, if you have Calamity Bearer, it's going to deal 6, which is a big deal. If it's targeted, you're going to get to deal 3 or 6. Or if you don't want to target it, you look at a couple cards, then you get to play an additional one. So that's also good, right? So it does a lot of work. And I think that might be, you know, obviously Bone Crusher Giant is the best giant in the deck. This might actually be the second best one, at least in my opinion. And it's also been an underappreciated card in Standard since it's been around. Then we do have 2 Battle of the Frost and Fire. And this is really just dealing the damage to all the non-giant creatures. Does that mean you're going to lose your Cobra? Yes. But at that point, if we're losing the Cobra when there's already 5 mana available, we're probably okay with it, and we're going to end up with the only 1 or 2 creatures left on the battlefield. It does let you scry 3 as a second chapter, and then when you play a spell with converted mana cost 5 or greater this turn, you draw 2 cards and discard a card. Very likely you're only going to be casting 1 spell and then just drawing your cards and discarding. So it's not the most exciting. You're mostly playing it as a 5 mana one-sided wrath for the most part. And well, granted, you could, if you that was a really big deal, you could sideboard in the other white giant that's available, but I didn't necessarily want to do that just for 1 card, because that's all we'd be putting in. Quakebringer. This is another one I'm going to be interested to see how it plays out. It is 5 mana. It's a 5/4. But it keeps your opponents from gaining life, which is a big deal because we know that clerics and angels are both going to be running around gaining a bunch of life. There's already some other white aggressive decks that do the life gain thing. So this could be pretty good against that. At the beginning of your upkeep, if it's on the battlefield or in your graveyard and you control a giant, it deals 2 damage to each opponent as well. So it has a little bit of extra action going on. It does have Foretell, so you could just set it aside and then play it for 4 later, which is also good to get a 5/4 with a really big upside. So I don't know. This is a card that I feel like really late in the game, just that nickel and dime little damage could be a big thing here. Then we're going to go with 3 Beanstalk Giants. I tried to squeeze 4 in, but it just wasn't really cutting it. But, if you're able to do something reasonable on 2 and maybe you have a 4 mana play, you can set up something to just go find your land and then really go big. All the way up to 5 mana on the following turn, which is a reasonable thing. But obviously, we weren't going to get by without playing the Beanstalk Giant. I also want to say, while we're thinking about it, one of the other options, if you don't want to play Kolvori, I believe this list could play Klothys and get away with it and still be pretty good. Mostly because Klothys will be consistent damage. You do have a lot of things that are, well, I mean, tons of stuff that are double green, I mean, double red. You do have some green stuff in here. So you could even get Klothys to be a live body potentially with relative ease. So something else to consider if you want a replacement for your Kolvori, at least in the early couple of days. Let's take a look at the rest of the lands, though, here. Nothing real spectacular. We're playing all the pathways that are available, playing 4 Fable Passage, 4 Triomes, 3 Mountain, 1 Forest, 1 Island. When we're mostly playing the Fable Passages here because we are able to play the Cobra. If we weren't playing Cobra, I may not play the Fable Passages, and I might just go with some split of Forest and Mountains there. And then, like I said, if you choose to play the Wolf Willow Haven, that's probably another reasonable replacement. Now, again, is this the best version of Giants? I have no idea. I know every version of Giants we see here in the first couple weeks is going to look different until somebody figures out the secret sauce, right? Whatever that formula is. And again, I will say, if you need some replacements that are cheaper or, you know, you just already have available, you can replace the Cobra with the Wolf Willow Haven. You could replace the Kolvoris with Klothys. That's another thing you can do. And that could help, you know, your resources early on in building this deck if you want to try it out and cut down the number of rares or mythics you need, either from this set or previous sets. So, I don't know, there's some options. It's an interesting looking deck, and I think there is a spot for this type of deck if the metagame falls correctly. You know, if we end up being in a world where we're doing a lot of mid-rangey things, then maybe Giants are where it's at. You have some really big creatures, they have some really good upside, they have abilities that work well with each other, so that could be really nice. If we're in a super heavy aggro environment, then we may have to do some version where we're playing more of the one that deals 4 damage, everything, you know, that Saga. Otherwise, you know, I don't think this works well in a control environment just because so many of your spells are so slow. You're rarely going to get more than 1 spell off a turn. And sometimes that's how the creature decks are able to get underneath the control deck. So that's something to think about. But if you wanted to check it out, here's at least a decent build to try on day 1. Also, if you haven't, please remember to like this video to get it in front of more people, and then hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you get notified every single time we have videos going up, because we're going to put out several between now and the release of Kaldheim if you just want to get some more decks under you. But yeah, that's going to be it for now. That's all I got. We'll see you next time.